share my screen then, shall I? You confirming you can still see the right screen?
We're seeing KAMAR. It's an acronym.
Sweet.
Yeah.
I know. It's one of those things that always bugs me. Is like KAMAR is in caps, but I have to point out it's an acronym. And I always get asked what it means. It basically, it stands for, oh, now it stands for School Administration, Markbook and Reporting. So I'll get started. First of all, here's my agenda for the day. Basically, I'm going to give you a quick demonstration of KAMAR. I'm going to talk about our transition from KAMAR, which was using Classic only, and FileMaker Pro, to our redesign using themes and with the ultimate goal of using Pro and WebDirect. Some of that I'm going to talk about the things, the gotchas that we hit as we were using WebDirect. Then I've got some things that just I thought might be worth mentioning. Finally, moving on to things about developing a vertical solution and allowing individual customer customization. And finally, hopefully I'll have time to talk about how we manage and automate our updating cycle. First of all, talk about myself. My name's Kent. I've just realized I didn't even put my name on that slide. I'm the original developer of KAMAR, and I live in Mount Maunganui, New Zealand. Now, for those of you in the world, this is New Zealand, where, as you can see, front and center. In fact, if I zoom in, the place I live in is the city of Tauranga, and we're in the suburb of Mount Maunganui. And if I keep zooming in a bit further, see roughly where that Mount Maunganui is, where I'm currently sitting right now. My background is I was a teacher. So I went through university, computer science degree, diploma of teaching, and then I was teaching for 10 years. And then I moved on to KAMAR development, and I've been doing that now for about 24 years. And it sounds like a bit of a CV, but in my hobbies and spare time, I like biking, playing tennis. I like to get out and playing tennis at this time of year, probably 2 or 3 times a week. And just to show I have been around the world, I have been to various of the Grand Slam tournaments, Wimbledon and Roland Garros. The bottom picture at the bottom is my local tennis club. I had to throw that in there because I have not yet managed to get to Flushing, New York, but that's one of my bucket list items. About our company, like I said, been doing this since '99, and I originally started KAMAR in FileMaker 4.1. And as horrid as I like to say, there are still aspects of KAMAR which are original code from 4.1 that have migrated through the various versions up into today. Our target market is secondary schools in New Zealand, and our primary market is the year 7 to 13. We refer to them as colleges or high schools, but that's years 7 to 13. But we do also have clients through the whole. I think the US refers to as K to 12. New Zealand, we refer to them as years 1 to 13. Our client base is roughly 400 client schools throughout the country. We do also have a couple of schools in Rarotonga and Niue who follow the New Zealand curriculum. Probably a little bit about the New Zealand market. What the education New Zealand is, we have what is self-managed schools. And basically the way it works is the government says, oh, you've got 1,000 students, so we're going to give you this much money, and then how you spend it is up to you. So that's what that means for us is every client of ours is the school. That's probably different to overseas where I know, for example, in Australia, and some counties in the US, the student management system that's is supplied by the state or the county, and schools use it. In our case, we are employed by the schools. Our team, I currently have 4 developers, 3 QA and documentation, 10 support who do phone, chat, training sort of thing, and a part-time administrator. And one of the things that I've been hassled about over the years is we have no sales or marketing team. All of our clients throughout the country have been through word of mouth and people moving on from one school to another. For those of you that were in the general chat before, this is our wall. I suppose I can do a little bit of bragging. I haven't necessarily been to every DevCon to collect those. FileMaker ship them out when I don't make it. Right, that's the who am I. FileMaker refer to us as a vertical solution. I don't like that name, but that's what they refer to us. Basically, one product, many clients. We don't allow custom client changes to our core solution, and we do that through custom files, which are basically files that sit on the side of our solution. And I'll talk about that later as well. And we also offer hosted, where we host our solution for the school, or they can host it on their site themselves. We're a student management system. New Zealand we refer to as an SMS. Overseas, SIS, I think, Student Information Systems, and different names like that. Our core functionality is we're a student staff database, but from that we deal with hundreds of things really, and I've just listed a few of them. Some of the core things like daily attendance, pastoral care, learner support, groups awards. We have a timetabling module, we have a calendar, teacher relief, notices. We have implementations for bulk emailing or text messaging. We also integrate with third parties. New Zealand government probably being the most annoying and rigorous ones of them, but other ones, integrations, Microsoft AD, Entra, counting packages. I think Xero's probably our main one used in New Zealand these days, and obviously different other APIs. As I said, technologies we use Pro and WebDirect for staff. We use Go for a reception app. We use Data API for a student caregiver web portal, and obviously the Admin API for automating server configuration. I did some quick stats when I was drafting this together. We have 56 core files in our solution at the moment, and that doesn't include the school custom files. And we operate, or I believe, in a kind of a three-tier philosophy. We have interface files, we have logic files where we go and do work, or they hold static data or things like that. And the remaining files are the school's data. Some of those files are one file, one table, history, FileMaker 4 days, if you remember that far back, or size. Like when a particular file hits gigabytes, we tend to say, well, that's files dedicated for that task. It just means backups and all the other flow on effects are more efficient. Currently, we have about 522 data tables, 2,000 plus layouts, and I quick count this morning was 1,192 of those are interface navigation layouts. The rest will be printouts and things like that. And well over 10,000 scripts, and one file had 5,720 scripts in that file. So trying to give you a little bit of an idea of the size of our solution. Okay, the goal of today is talk about our WebDirect, how we use WebDirect. We started our transition from Classic in 2018. It took us 2 years. I remember the first 4 weeks, we didn't even get past the first layout, and we had, problem when you got 4 developers all interested, and you have debates and arguments about how things are going to look and feel, and little debates on spacing, font to use, and little things like, in the end, we decided all fields would be 26 high, and then there'd be 26 points high, and then a 4-point gap between the next field. So those sorts of decisions all got made. And from then we went on with converting the remaining 1,000 plus layouts, reapplying the theme. And those of you that have been through that process know how time consuming that is. Our goal when we set out to do that was to get 90% of the functionality that we had working on Pro also working in WebDirect. So what I mean by that is we knew there'd be some functionality that have to continue as Pro for, but we wanted as much where the feature, the way it worked, and the functionality was the same, and regardless of whether they used WebDirect or FileMaker Pro. In the end, I believe at the moment we're sitting at 95% of KAMAR's functionality is the same in both Pro and Web. Now, one of the gotchas when we first started WebDirect was that card windows weren't supported. They came out about a month before we released our new version in WebDirect. And since then, we've moved a lot of things that we'd used popovers for into card windows. But that was an annoying factor, I guess. It limited what we could do because card windows are great for a lot of things, but we said we couldn't use them because they didn't work on WebDirect at the time. Right. So what I'm going to do now is go a demonstration of KAMAR. Not get into any details about the pitfalls yet, hopefully just give you an idea of size of our solution and what it does. And I'm going to do this in WebDirect. And of course, because I spoke too long, it logged out on me. And where is my, excuse me. This is a great thing about passwords and security is if you So what I'm going to do is just as a quick overview of KAMAR, we're a school administration. So the first thing schools need to do is set up a timetable. And from here, you can see I'm on my dashboard and we've got our navigation along the top. Now, we have tried to keep the same style. So this navigation bar is on every single interface layout. And I will talk about that again later and the pain that comes with keeping something like that up to date. Our navigation and what can be seen is all driven by the user's access levels. If I go in, and I know there's a couple of you in the room here that have got education backgrounds, so timetable changes is where we will define the courses that a school is offering. So taking an example, when I was teaching, I was a teacher of computer studies. So I will just quickly add in my code, and I'm definitely not going to explain how timetabling works, but give you an idea. I taught an 11 ICT class, and I might have also taught a 12 ICT computing class. And you've already seen one of WebDirect's lovely display rendering issues that come into play and the highlighting of what happens there. The way that works is we're creating a timetable. We've defined an option subject where students can select to this, electives or whatever you want to refer to them as. Back on this screen here, I've said 11 ICT occurs at these times during the week. So we're during the timetable. Now, one of the things I had to do way back at the start was create a timetable generation tool. So we have the ability to collect what options students want to do and then basically assign them to their classes in a best fit way, balancing classes to give them class sizes as close to be the same size as they weigh, dealing with clashes when a student wants to do two subjects that are on at the same time. So for example, if I just quickly add another teacher, and for example, let's say this one is going to be doing, let's say 11 English on at the same time, you may have a student that wants to do both of those subjects and they're only available. So we have a shuffle routine for handling that sort of thing. Now, if I then go in and put against a student, and I have my daughter as my test student, and let's say she's going to do 11 ICT, you can see we've read from that timetable area the teacher of that class. And if I go into the timetable area, hopefully I should now see a timetable reflecting where they are at any time during the school day. Right. Now, that's really simple. Let's move on to attendance. As the teacher, jump the gun. Let me just cut back to my dashboard. Of course, I haven't set my calendar up for the year, so let me just quickly hop on to a school date. Term 1, enter attendance, try it again. Monday, as a teacher, there's my class. And in the real world, I would probably have a class of 24 to 30 students, and I'd be marking their class as present. Although we've got checks in, I can't go and mark a student as attending when the date hasn't passed. Should have tested that earlier in the day, shouldn't I? Okay. Now, we're a management system, we're a school system. Another thing schools will do is they will set up a markbook, and this is where we will add in assessments, grades, recording of grades. So if I quickly go through the process of creating a class test, and then in here, I'm going to define this class test. In fact, I've used a template which says that the teacher's going to enter a mark out of 20. And then in here, I'm actually going to take the result of part 1 and multiply it by 2, because we've built in a calculation engine which allows schools to do this. And once they've done that, they can go in and obviously add in multiple assessments. We can then go into the entry screen. I can go in and put in that my daughter got a grade of 15, and we've converted that to there. Now from that, schools can go in, and the next stage would be the teacher, say once or twice a year, would write report comments. And in this area, they'll go and write the report comments. Eventually, we can drag that through to either live reporting or a formalized PDF report that would get emailed or printed and sent home. Now, so we've talked about markbook, we've talked about attendance. From this, we can also do financial, where we can then say, right, I want to create a charge for 11 ICT charge, and I'm going to link that to my timetable and set my criteria to be the subject 11 ICT, and then I'm going to charge my students. Oops, I didn't tell them how much to charge. Just go GST, $15. And link through the charged area. Financial, record the payments. And you'll notice the lag's not too bad in WebDirect. I've been actually quite happy with most of the performance of WebDirect. I am in the fortunate situation, this server, it's not actually on-prem. This server is actually across side in town. So we've got in our data center. So I'm using this over our internet connection in our data center. I'm going to record a payment, bang, method of payment, away we go. Now, because we integrate with different accounting packages, we can batch that up and send that into the accounting package. Now, from a general administration point of view, we can go and look up students' progress. So from here, from academic, I can get a record of past reports that we have sent home to the student. I can look at their assessment results, bringing through the different results from past years and this year as well. We keep track of pathways they're doing, effort in class, teams and groups they've been involved in. All the sorts of things that a school wants to know and learn about their student. Right. So that's a very, very quick. And in all bluntness, when I do a demo for a school, we allow an hour and a half to 2 hours, and even then we don't cover all areas of KAMAR. I've given myself all of 5 minutes to show you that much information. Right. I did say I'd ask questions after the demo, but I don't know and feel if there's any point at this time. So I might move on. I've lost my zoom, by the way. I don't know if there was any questions at that point, or shall I move on to the next bit?
Anybody have any questions?
My problem is when I share screen, I lose the chat. Nope.
No questions. Oh,
And will you also be demoing? Do people use this with Pro as well?
Yeah, sure. So to give you, let me just bring Pro to the front. I guess that is probably worthwhile pointing out is everything I showed you there, we tried to do and look the feel in Pro and WebDirect. So that's one of the great things about WebDirect is that once you know the gotchas, it's designed once, use in both Pro and WebDirect. So this is the dashboard. If I just quickly flick back to my WebDirect web viewer, you'll notice there's hardly any difference in appearance. If we go into students' details where I was before, academic, let's pick that screen up and let's do the same in WebDirect, NCA. So most of the time you can't tell, well, I've obviously got different data in my set, but you can't tell the difference between Pro and WebDirect in terms of how it looks and feels.
How many times have you tried to go into layout mode when you're looking at your WebDirect?
Yeah, do you know what it does? Command L is an annoying shortcut. Yes. Yep, I've done it a lot. Yeah.
So you have the exact you didn't have to make two different layouts for your Pro and for your WebDirect, and
we have not. No. The horror of
there's a lot of data on here and it's very well laid out. And yeah, I'm used to seeing things spaced out generously and things like that, trying to make things work. And
yeah, we definitely we've done we've 12 point is the minimum font size we use now, whereas we used to be slightly smaller, 10 or 11 points. So now we use 12 point as our minimum. We've standardized on the font we standardized was on Tahoma, because when we started this project, that was on 98% of platforms by default. So, little design decisions like that in terms of our influence of our design. And sorry.
Okay, yeah. What happens if somebody tries to zoom in the browser? Yeah, that still looks great.
And if we go into, we only give them a FileMaker's limited zoom. So we extensively use the auto resizing. So as you'll see with a lot of layouts, they are set to adjust to the window size. We standardized on, interesting enough, I think all our layouts have a maximum width of 1200, but most of them are 1100 wide. And whenever possible, we've tried to scroll vertically and not vertically and horizontally, if that makes sense.
Right, of course. Anything for mobile?
At the moment, this works on when you're in WebDirect and you connect to this using a tablet, no issues at all. We did so when we first started, we did some testing around the sizes we needed to make buttons and the spacing we needed to have in between, so that when you were using an iPad, fat thumbs had no problems clicking on navigation. We are doing dedicated layouts for mobile, and one of my developers is almost finished that project now. That would be a slimmed down version, not 100% functionality, but okay.
I think Stephen had a couple questions too. I don't.
Yes, I can't see the chat window. It completely disappeared.
I can read them for Stephen if he's not on mic. I guess the first thing he asked is, "Are you using ham?" And I'm guessing he means a headless automation module or something like that. Oh no, headless authorization module. Sorry.
Is that a term? it's not, sorry, that's not an expression I'm used to.
Yeah, headless authorized. Yeah, probably not. But yeah, it's and
Okay, I think he might be referring to, we use FileMaker's security as what we would call the first level. So, and then we have our own security model on top. So if I just quickly hop in to set up users, I talked about how we allow the schools to fully customize what items the teachers see in the top nav, so they can turn that off and on. And that's all based on their logon. So we use FileMaker's security as that first tier. When we do an authentication, we are re-authenticating as another user. So we've got FileMakers at the back end, but then we use our own on top of that, if that makes sense. I think that's what he means by ham.
like added functionality there.
That's what ham does also. It does, it's not authorizing you into the file, but it's authorizing you what you can do once you are inside the file. And it's,
Okay, and his second question?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, cool. Okay, so as you've seen with what we've managed to achieve, about 90% of KAMAR's functionality is identical in behavior, look, feel, regardless of whether you're using Pro or WebDirect. And you are correct. There are multiple times I've gone Command-L in a web browser. You know, when you're testing something that's worked, and you say, "Oh, I just need to tweak that," and regretted it 2 seconds later. So I thought I'd go over, and this is by no means exhaustive list, but some of the gotchas that we keep in mind when we're doing web development work on WebDirect. There are definitely more, but some of these are the ones that will strike you straight away, and some of these are the ones that continue to strike us. Probably the first one that I'm going to cover with WebDirect is no click-through. So if you have an object that's over top of a button, you can't click through to that button. Now, it can be, the object could actually be a group. And so there is actually nothing visible there, but the grouped area, the rectangle of the grouped area overlaps with your button. And as a result of that, when you're in WebDirect, you can't click on that object. If it's a field, you can't click to enter the field because it's behind whatever it is. And the one, we know that, but the one that still gets us is auto resizing can affect with a grouped object overlapping a button. And that's when you get weird things where it works sometimes, but not others, depending on the size of the user's web window. And I have an example of one I've just fixed recently to show you what I mean by that one later. So that's the first gotcha. The second thing you've got to think about when you're doing WebDirect is that the contents of tabs, sliders, popovers, they load when the layout's loaded. So this can have some performance impacts when you have multiple tabs, because in Pro, if you have a tab with 5, it only loads what's in the front tab, and it only loads the second tab if the user actually clicks there. But with WebDirect, all 5 contents get loaded. So there's a huge performance impact, and we hit some of that on the attendance screen that I showed you before, because that actually had tabs. And what was happening was when we did it as tabs initially, it was really slow to render every single time because the contents of one of the other tabs had something that was taking a long time to load. So we ended up using fake tabs whenever we have that situation arise. We don't worry when the tabs just got same record data, but when the other tabs have related data that's slow to load, then we'll introduce fake tabs instead. So we end up using 4 layouts when we could have got away with 1 layout with a tab set. The other thing we now do is we use card windows a lot instead of popovers. And again, it's about that whole loading of the popovers, especially in list view where you've got a popover that's in against each record. So those are things when you're developing for WebDirect to keep count. Other things, we obviously couldn't just, write a file to disk and then wherever the user asks us to. So there was sometimes the FileMaker generic export or save as Excel didn't work for us. So what we discovered a way around that was we write to a variable. We would then save that variable in as a container field and then export the container field. And then when we did that, FileMaker very nicely in WebDirect generated a download for us. So that was how we got around custom exports. Some of the other things was to avoid, and this one's not just WebDirect, but when we were doing the theme, we wanted one theme that had everything in, and we identified some things like sometimes the settings in, for example, a tab set that are stored in the theme. And I couldn't remember off the top of my head, but I think the one is the alternate view state checkbox, for example. Whenever you toggle that, it makes the theme be edited. We ended up giving up on rounded corners because what we were trying to do is like have rounded corners, but we ended up with a theme object or 4 theme objects, which are all the same, but they had differences in terms of which rounded corners were enabled. And it just became, we don't want to have and maintain 4 themed objects just with different rounded corners. Either that or you compromise and you settle for having one theme, but with customizations of which corners. The other thing we did was we have one layout where we basically, that's our theme master. If we want to make a change to the theme, we make it on that layout. We have a copy of the item that is using that particular theme. And then that way, this layout has got copies of every object in theory that matches every theme style that's in the layout. SVG images. I got burnt by this when I found this great SVG image and then was wondering why it was so large. And it was basically just a SVG wrapper around a image, a PNG image in this particular case. So I'm going to mention that as a gotcha. Again, this is not just WebDirect, but obviously WebDirect and SVG images go together really well. So keep SVG images as slim as possible. I've got in the habit, whenever I get an SVG that I want in our solution, I edit it in an SVG editor. My choice of tool is an application on Mac called Graphic. I then adjust it and resave it. And if you've dabbled with some SVG, sometimes you find that the SVG is just in the top left of the corner and the original artist has got a huge lot of white space around it. So I tend to edit it and clean those up. And then I tend to view in a plain text editor. I don't think you still have to do it, but you added the old FM fill to get the color for conditional formatting purposes and things like that. And I would do that before I bring them in. On that note, one of my grumbles with SVGs, we had an SVG, we use it an awful lot. And one day, one of my developers accidentally deleted it from the palette. So, and we ended up having to bring it in again. And now we've got half our layouts which have the original version of that SVG image that's no longer in the palette. And the rest of the layouts, all the newer ones, have the new copy of it. Another grumble I'm going to mention here, button bars and repeating fields, they do not render the same. And in Pro, if you use a repetition field and say 500 wide with each segment of 100, all good. With a button bar, if you make each segment 100, the button bar will be actually 501 wide. That's in Pro. In WebDirect, it's even worse than that. And so if you've got, and you've tried to create like a table with a repetition of data down one column and then button bars down the next, it all looks good in Pro, and then you go into WebDirect and there's a really noticeable misalignment happening. So what we ended up doing in those situations was using button bars for both situations. And one of the button bars is literally just showing the data. It actually probably was a good thing because it meant we've ended up using repetition fields less. But
are you using layout calculations yet?
No. I'll come back to that one in the discussion after this, if that's right. Checkboxes, when you're in web browsers, the checkboxes, the FileMaker checkboxes, they display as the native checkbox. So on Mac, the standard traditional square, and on Windows, the same one. The problem with that is, apart from the fact that it doesn't match your style, they also they take up more space. So unless you end up editing the Pro to be exactly the same size, and unfortunately Mac versus Windows and even different browsers, they're not all the same size. So in the end, we avoid the FileMaker native OS checkboxes, and we've just ended up using tick boxes and checkboxes using button bars with a tick SVG image. The other thing is value lists. In WebDirect, they are fixed. As soon as you go over about 10 items, they don't become scrollable. You have this little more button. So if you've got a value list which has got more than 10 and the user wants the item that's, say, the 31st item, they're having to do a lot of things. I hated that personally. So we tend to actually avoid value lists completely, and we've ended up using popovers or card windows with a portal inside instead. Other little things, print versus PDF. WebDirect print is PDF. They just becomes a download. So what we've done is we hide, but in Pro, we'll give the user a print and PDF option, but in WebDirect, we only give one of the options. And similar for export and save as Excel options, we just show one of them. There's no on keystroke script trigger. Now, when we look at our usage of this one, most of the time is we're looking for the user pressing escape because they're on a card window and we want to hide it, or they're pressing enter return because they want to action. So for example, on that logon screen you saw me use, in the WebDirect, we can detect the pressing enter. And the way we do that is we end up adding a next field on the layout with an on enter script trigger. And then we made it the next in the tab order. So when the user is in that password field and press enter, it goes to the next field, and the next field fires the on enter script trigger. So that's how we get around some things like using script triggers. Right. So let me just show you some of the things. The first one is that object appearance issue. And I'm going to show you the example. If I just hop back into Pro and let me just set my zoom to normal. This is the example that got me the other day. And it was one of those ones is like, I was actually all ready to blame FileMaker for being buggy as anything. But the user report I got was they could not click on those two rows in a web browser. And when I went into layout mode, I looked at it and thought, there's nothing wrong there. You do the normal things, you select all looks fine. Couldn't find any reason that they couldn't click on those two rows. And it was only the first row. It was never, the second onwards was all fine. As it turns out, this object over here, which is a multiple of objects and is all locked to line right, all looks good, but the group had been locked to line left and right. So what was happening was in browse mode, even though everything within that group was showing on the right as we expected, the grouped object itself was auto resizing. In effect, the left-hand size was staying there. Now, what that meant was in the web browser, I've timed out, depending on the size of the user's web browser window, they could not click on that top row. If hopefully my web browser window is big enough to demonstrate this effect. It's not. No, unfortunately I need to make the window bigger. But if you get the end result was they couldn't click on that there. And it was all because this object, when it resized, was invisibly drawing over top of this region here. It actually turns out these objects were fine because they were above the object, but this being below it chronologically in layout mode was not clickable through. So that's one of those. Sorry?
If you zoom out, will it show that effect?
Good point. Let's, I'll leave that back on. Let's go, you're right, because someone got me to zoom in and I didn't pay attention. In fact, it should give me that effect, you're quite right. So if I click there now, I've already fixed it. So the problem is I may have broken my order. Let me just bring that back to the arrange, bring to front, because it's all about the order as well. So if I make sure that's at the front and over top, and let's just, okay, no, I'm not achieving it now. But the end result was, the point I'm trying to make and failing in this demo is grouped objects that are set to resize create this invisible area over top, if that makes sense. And because WebDirect doesn't allow the click through to happen in that case, it created this obscure bug, basically, where the user couldn't click in the rightmost areas of that. Does that make sense? This is one that gets us.
Just apply a background color to that object in layout mode, and just so that you can demonstrate.
Well, the problem is, David, it's actually the group that was resizing, and the group didn't have an object. But if I understand what you're saying, let me just quickly I'll just put a box there, right? Yeah. And in effect, do that effect. And we must have a style that's, yep, that's horrible, right? Like that.
Yeah.
And just wait for WebDirect to, okay. So that's, yeah, thanks, David. That saved the torture of me trying to do it. So that was exactly what was happening in that particular case. And as you can see, it was perfectly overlapping with the first row, but because it was a group, it just wasn't clear and obvious of what it was. For us, it's little things that were getting us in terms of that one. So let me just go into this layout. See this area here, this object here is a copy paste. I'll just make sure I put it back. It was fine until we grouped it. And then as soon as we grouped it, it was positioned in front of all these buttons. So it was one of those things. It was working fine. We'll just group these things up and make it all nice and tidy. And then it stopped working. And even though this particular grouped object has nothing in that area, because it was part of the group, it overlapped those buttons. And then, so what we have to do with this is we just have to make sure that's always, in fact, you can see it's third from the bottom in my layout inspector, behind these particular buttons in their layout order.
I think it might be better to use a invisible slider as a grouping object if you needed to group elements together.
But that will still have the same object. Yeah, you're right. The slider with that. But then the problem with that is then you might end up these buttons ending up in the slider. And we don't want that in this particular case. That's a copy pastable from our perspective. But you're right. Using a slider can get around that particular issue. So I'm just looking at my notes, which was the reason I spend so much time on that one is because that is the one that gets us all the time. And it can be as simple as you've just tweaked something, you've worked around with it, and then if you forget to go back and check it in WebDirect to make sure you haven't accidentally placed a grouped object in front of it, then you get bitten by that.
If you ever got layout within a layout, it would fix that problem.
Thanks, Keith.
Sorry, it's my job to bring sarcasm to the
No, it's fine, Keith. You know how many times I've asked for that. So
yeah.
I talked about this screen here. This originally was one tab, but what we found is because the tabs load all their contents in WebDirect, and this screen here was quite slow to load because it was summarizing attendance data, it was causing performance to be really slow. So this is, from our perspective, fake tabs. This is a list view, however. We have other screens, for example, like this. These are all different layouts. We've made it look to the user like it's a normal tab, but they are all separate layouts. And that's because this is grabbing data from the results table. This is grabbing data from the pathways. This is grabbing effort. So we didn't want that performance to suffer, or more importantly, this layout to take 5 seconds to load on WebDirect every time someone went to this particular layout because of the fact it was loading all the data. The other thing we've more importantly done is, going back to the attendance, is we have these popovers here. That's all good because that's very little data, and that data here comes from the same record. But over here, we were showing some information about the student. Originally, we had this as a popover, and again, it was pre-card windows in WebDirect. But again, we were noticing huge performance issues because that particular popover was against every single student in the list of records. So by moving it to a card window, we got rid of that overhead of loading.
Hey, Ken, can I jump in on that? I dropped something in the chat. Just to clarify, this is really significant. One of the, and I just want to get confirmation that I'm hearing what you're saying correctly. It's one of the techniques that we use a lot in Pro is to take summary fields in a list view and put them, quote unquote, behind a popover. It sounds like you are saying that a summary field behind a popover in a list view that's rendered by WebDirect will calculate the summary, or am I mishearing perhaps?
So that's, no, I think you're right. It's because basically what I'm saying is if it's to do with the tabs. Pro, you have multiple tabs, doesn't load the contents of the other tabs until the user actually physically clicks on them. Then FileMaker Pro evaluates that tab contents. WebDirect, it renders all the tabs.
Okay,
In terms of your,
sorry, go ahead.
In terms of your summary field on the layout, that's on the layout. That's evaluating anyway, even in Pro. You're wanting it hidden on Pro.
I think we might be talking about the distinction. Excuse me, long day. The distinction between rendering like the structure, the fields, and so forth and so on, and then the data. So I'm calming down a little bit because it seems like we might be saying that WebDirect will render all of the underlying structure, but will perhaps wait until you click the popover in WebDirect to call the summary data.
Yeah, so popovers, I'm not 100% positive on them because we do see in WebDirect that one. So I wasn't, but what I am referring to sliders and tabs because everything in the slider and tab renders out on layout load. Popovers, I think, do a load when you click on them. So they don't have the same overhead, but obviously popovers on a different tab, they're still being rendered. The popover itself is still being rendered.
Yeah, I mean, so render structure, but perhaps not data, subject to testing. Okay, interesting.
You would need to test that, but definitely data on other tabs that aren't visible does get evaluated and loaded.
Okay,
And
interesting.
my understanding, the difference with that is because I'm just trying to think if there's anywhere where we do use an actual tab anymore because we've tended to go for fake tabs everywhere. Okay,
This
here is an actual.
in this feature of like, trying to construct layouts that have sort of an on-demand feature to them, the three objects, if I recall, were like if you put something on a hidden tab or a hidden slide panel or a hidden popover or to the right of that line and whatnot, and that changed in one version temporarily or permanently. Those were ways that you could have data that was on the layout but wouldn't render unless you clicked. And it was therefore a perfect place for summary data, which if you're in a list view most of the time, I don't need to see the summary data, but it's nice to be able to see it without navigating to another. I'll do some testing on WebDirect at some point. Thank you.
So this is an example of an actual FileMaker tab. So this, even though it's actually two different things, both of those are rendered at the time the layout was drawn. That it doesn't do a callback when the user clicks on residence B and brings that data then. It's already done at the layout. So yeah.
Yeah, the key thing is to always test, and don't test with just a few rows. Test on a WAN with millions of records.
Yeah.
That way,
Like
it's
for us,
totally obvious to you.
yeah, for us, the attendance screen was the one that slapped us in the face because the visible tab had very little data, but one of the other tabs was doing summary data, which is what you were talking about. And that's the one that was like causing the whole layout. Every time you did something which caused the layout to be redrawn, there was this 5-second delay. And it was all because of that list view of summary data times the 24 students.
And you mentioned the card windows don't have the same issue that you have not
Correct.
seen the same issue with card windows, so that would potentially indicate a refactor from popovers to card windows.
Card window is technically another layout and doesn't get loaded until you bring it open.
Right.
FileMaker doesn't know what. One, it doesn't know that you're going to show a card window, and two, it doesn't know what layout and data you're going to show in that card window until you run the script. So it's definitely totally independent.
Yeah, card windows are layouts, hidden secret.
Yep, exactly. So again, I'll hop back into Pro. We had a number of cases where we needed to create custom exports, which weren't necessary data from one table. So the timetable is a case example where we were basically taking data from 3 tables, compiling it into a JSON file, which we then wanted to provide the user. So we couldn't use just a generic FileMaker export. We needed to write this as a file. So the way we achieved that was basically we generated the JSON data as just a variable. We then saved that into a container field. And then once it was in the container field, we just used the export field contents of that container fields, which then generates that file. And as long as that field is in the frontmost window, this was a gotcha that was like, why is this not working? It will then just provide it as a file that you can download within the web browser. So that's a relatively simple workaround that we had. For importing, we basically ended up doing the same thing because we couldn't necessarily, we wanted to be able to process that file that was the JSON file. So we did the reverse. We used the WebDirect functionality to import it into a container field. Once it was in that container field, we just grabbed the file out of the container file and processed it in the variable in reverse. Does that make sense? Hard to show that one.
Nice.
Yep. So I've talked about the SVGs. Probably the main SVG that we use an awful lot of is the tick box. So we ended up just creating I'm just trying to find an example of a tick box. This is jumping ahead of things. I probably should have. We ended up with an SVG, which was a tick box. And we use that, as you can see examples here. The advantage from our perspective is we didn't see, this is the native FileMaker one, or the native OS one in that particular case. These are our ones. We can control the size. They look the same on Pro and WebDirect. And we also avoided some of the horrible thing about the FileMaker one is if the user clicks that and then goes paste, you end up with the whatever happened to be in their clipboard in that field. Whereas these ones, there's no interaction and things, or you're not actually opening the field in a way that leaves it editable by the user another way. For value lists and things like that, we ended up doing things in terms of here. Originally, I had this as like a value list where we listed all the option subjects that were available. We ended up just using a card window for that. And it actually gave us a lot more control and flexibility. Previously, instead of this list here, we were just showing a value list. By changing it from a value list to a card window, we got the same effect, but we're actually able to add some filtering in as well. And when you're talking of a list, because in a school, they may have 40, 50, 60 option subjects on the line, by adding filtering and showing it as a card window with a portal, it actually ended up working a lot faster, and it gave a much nicer interface for the user. I talked about print. So this is how we've approached that. We have an actions button, and this is where we hide the print PDF spreadsheet options. In WebDirect, if I go to exactly the same layout in Pro, you'll see we have more options. And so we're just literally using, that's a portal filter, and we just hide the options that aren't applicable on the WebDirect. And it gave us the ability, again, keeping the one layout. From the user perspective, minor differences, but the easiest way for us to approach that. Questions on that? No. So those are the main, I want to say gotchas or things that we had to take into account when we were working with WebDirect. Most of the other things, from the WebDirect perspective, just works. It is one of those technologies that FileMaker have actually done quite well, and it's definitely improved over the years, where you can design, put things on layouts, and not have to worry about, not have to have a dedicated layout for WebDirect versus Pro. And we definitely do not do that. So Eric, I don't know if there's any questions. I'm about to move on to the next section if there aren't.
You must have had a bit of a heart attack when a certain former product manager suggested that WebDirect was rubbish software and they were going to get rid of it.
Yeah, let's not talk about that, David. That product manager doesn't do that anymore, do they?
It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. I think there was definitely a lull in WebDirect development for a period there. But I know now that they have developers working on WebDirect again. And there is a QA person whose job is WebDirect. So definitely in the last few releases, it's become a lot more stable. And things like that. I'm not saying it's perfect. For those of you with eagle eyes, you can see here as an example of a repetition down the left and it not lining up with a button bar for the grid. This is actually minor. I've seen, but it's one of those annoying things where the lines don't line up and you go to a lot of effort to get them lining up.
It's off on line 1.
Sorry, David? No, that was Keith.
It's off on line 1.
Yeah, it's because the segment size on button bars is off by 1 point. This is fine. If I'll jump to that layout here, this is 100% fine in Pro. It's a rendering difference in WebDirect between repetitions and segments. Keith, it's one of those bugs that I've given Quigs to hopefully one day get alignment fixed on WebDirect.
Cool. So that brings me to my question then.
Yep.
Did you ever have to request Claris, like any help request or anything like support requests that you had to do for while you were building this?
In terms of using, no, we definitely have submitted bugs or annoyances or quirks on WebDirect, and thankfully most of those have been fixed over time. We've been using this in our schools now since 2020, so we're into our 4th year of using WebDirect, and I told you the numbers before. We've got 400 schools. Our license count is 22,500, but the actual number of people using it is probably more than that. We do see schools with anywhere from 20 to 50 users on. It definitely, when you start getting 40, 50 users, we start, you want to start giving that particular server plenty of RAM, or potentially look at a multi-host sort of scenario.
So each of these schools has their own server, their own installation.
Either we host for them or they have hosted on their own server. Yep. Any other questions?
Ken, do some of the teachers have a portal? I mean, sorry, not the teachers, the parents. Do the parents have a portal into any of this?
We in terms of numbers of students, we have around 750, 800,000 students that are potentially on our system. So we do not use WebDirect for that. We have a PHP web portal for parents and students to use, and that's driven by the data API.
I see. Thanks.
But the data in that it's a fraction. It's probably less than 10% of what is in KAMAR, because it's, it is intended for the students and teachers. But yeah, we use the data API for that. Okay.
Yeah, Kent, just a question.
Yes.
How's your journey been with different versions of WebDirect from 19 through to 19.3 to 20?
We started on WebDirect 17 when we started our development, and then it was WebDirect 18, FileMaker Server 18 that introduced card windows. They've gone through, I mean, in those days it was also Java 8, and then they've obviously gone to Java 11 and Java, what are we up to? We are Java 11 now for the web publishing client? 11.7, or no, we're up to 17 now, aren't we? In terms of the changes, we've not had major issues. Obviously, we've struck things that didn't work and they've been fixed, but we've not had a situation where a release of FileMaker has meant that we've had to significantly go through and refactor everything or make a change to every layout because of a WebDirect change. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, what about performance in different versions? How has it ramped up with the changes that Claris have put under the hood?
I think it's definitely, you notice it's a little bit more springier now than it was in the Java 8 days. And it's definitely got a lot more reliable. There's still, I think probably the biggest frustration is, and we've tried to make it so that it's not obvious to the users, but if someone reloads the page, right, you get the annoying thing, but you actually go back to the whole, you're logged out of WebDirect complete, you're having to go back to the start. And if you're on a mobile device, there's that whole swipe up effect, which by default causes the page to reload. So there's little frustrations like that with WebDirect that you just, end users kind of initially have to be aware of. But as long as people don't use the back button, because, it's tempting, they're actually, you got to remember, it's actually one page the whole time. When you're changing views, your web browser is not loading a whole new screen, so the back button doesn't work from that perspective.
It's all in one session, yeah.
It is all, yeah. It's basically an iframe, if you want to think of it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And with all your servers, have you had much issue with the WebDirect going deaf and having to reboot it?
Look, I've got 110 servers that we host for schools. We do not have issues with that. The main issue we have is when they run out of RAM because they've had so many users on and we just need to increase the RAM. I've not had reports of it going deaf. The
Okay.
one time we've had an issue was when our SSL certificate, not our SSL certificate, but the root in our SSL certificate had expired, and that caused the connection between WebDirect and server to fail. That was an interesting one to try and figure out what was going on there. But because our SSL certificate was fine, just the core root wasn't. But in terms of WebDirect, no, it's fine. I do confess, and I've got to acknowledge this, there was a memory error back in 19.6 where it was leaking RAM, and I automated a process to restart Web Publishing Engine overnight. And so we do restart the WPE every night. I think that happens about 1 o'clock in the morning. So that may actually help with its resilience. I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying that's what we do.
Yeah, I think that's become a common practice, particularly people moving from 19.3.2, where it was pretty good, to 19.63, where it started to occasionally go deaf. The upgrade from 20.2 to 20.3 seems to be a lot more stable and it not going deaf.
Right.
Were you currently running across the board as a platform version?
All our host schools are currently on 20.2, and I've got my template of 20.3 ready to go, so I'll be rolling that out shortly. So hopefully that will add stability. But we don't have any issues with stability during the day with WebDirect. Like we don't have situations where WebDirect has gone deaf or stopped responding. So, and that's out of 100 plus servers. So,
is this Mac, Windows, Linux?
All my servers at the moment are Windows servers. They're all virtual Windows servers. Linux servers is on my roadmap, but Mac is, virtualizing Mac servers is not really practical, so we don't virtualize them.
In the
Okay. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to ask, Kent, have you started to think about any uses of Claris Studio in your application or your solution?
No. We've looked at it.
Okay.
There's nothing there for us that we need. So no. Sorry, Claris. Apologies for any of those listening and trying to push Chaos Connect.
and what's the load on the largest server or your largest school?
That really comes down to how many are using WebDirect, because in our larger schools, they may still be using Pro, and it is just a case of allocating the resources. We had one large school that was using 100% WebDirect for all their staff, and when I say larger, they were like 120 teachers, and for them, we ended up having to put workers in because it was just too much for the one server. Generally, what happens though is what we find is when they're at school, they tend to use Pro and they use WebDirect at home. That's what we see a lot happening. So they're at school, they're on their work laptop, they use Pro, they're at home, they use WebDirect. So some teachers use both.
So when you scaled it, you scaled just fine then when you add the extra worker machine?
And for that particular at school, it did resolve their performance issues, yeah. It was kind of a bit more hassle because it's more maintenance for that school. So I guess the thing is though, I mean, FileMaker say it supports, I think it's 100 users, maybe they say even 200 now, but that really does come down to your solution. And in all honesty, KAMAR is quite a heavy solution in both more in RAM and usage than just a basic single database. So I can see, if we had a single database, 200, not a problem, but we're not. So when it hits, say, 40, 50 users plus on this one server, that's when I would definitely start looking for our solution at working at a worker scenario instead of a single server scenario. Okay. Right, conscious of moving on. I've decided to add some things we do to the list of things. This is not necessarily WebDirect things, but there are things that are part of our solution. The first thing I'm going to acknowledge is we have our own plugin. We use it. It's extensively in KAMAR. There are times we use it because there is a noticeable performance gain in doing something in plugin and RAM, and some things that just make sense. So open out there, develop our own plugin, and I put my hand up that we maintain that as well. Now, you've looked around our top navigation. I mentioned earlier that top navigation is copy and pasted on 1192 layouts. And when I refer to the top navigation, I'm referring to this object along the top here. Oops. Now, just as the way we keep that object is grouped, we're currently up to version 28. I know it might be a bit small, I can't see that, but that means there is upwards of 20 times where someone, and it's mostly been me, has gone through and copied and pasted this particular object onto all 1192 layouts. And I know I'm well aware of how painful that is, and everyone is probably aware of things like that. But that's how we maintain it. We give them a version number so that we can make sure we didn't miss a layout when we did the copy paste out. The other thing about our top nav is it's because it's based on that, it's entirely global driven. There's no, when we first started this and we clicked on one of the menus here, we used a portal. Now the problem with that is it required, bringing down data for the portal, but it required a relationship join so that you could show the portal. We want this top nav to be copy pastable to all our layouts, regardless what their base table was. So what we've done is it's fully globals, no relationships involved at all, just globals doing hides and then lovely button bars, which represent the items. The end result is a menu structure. And that menu structure is based on what the user can see. So if the school has turned off for me the ability to get into the bus route screen, then we hide that from the button bars. Because it's that, it works regardless of the base table, it's browse or find. And it even works in find. When we were using portals, they failed when you're in find mode because the relationship was no longer valid. So I'm sure, and this is how we've chosen to do it. When we went to globals, we also saw a noticeable performance improvement because we were having to refresh these portals when the user security changed. Now, as you're probably aware, whenever you do a refresh portal, FileMaker basically throws away all the data and goes back to the server and brings it down again. So we wanted to avoid that as well. This one was driven by WebDirect, but it actually had an improvement on Pro as well. We had layouts, and I'll just hop back into my attendance entry screen. You're viewing 24 records. This is coming from what we refer to as an option record, which is a record for that particular timetable year. But we were showing the student's name, for example, was from obviously the student details file, which was one record per student. Now, we ended up caching this. Again, a common technique people do. But what we found was the benefit of caching this in the same record was nothing on this row here is from the individual student details record. We ended up caching anything that was unique to the student in the same option record. Anything that wasn't, we buried away in the card window. We immediately saw a huge performance improvement on WebDirect, because for every record, obviously FileMaker was having to go and follow the relationship to look up the student's name. We cut that out. But also, every time we show this layout, we were sorting by that name. So the sort and the display performance increased significantly. That flowed on to an improvement in Pro as well. That was an added bonus, but it was definitely a WebDirect improvement.
How do you perform the cache?
Right. That's actually, Keith, I'm going to come to later on with my automated server-side scripts. But we do have a trigger. Whenever that name is changed, we trigger a refresh of the cache in the relevant tables. There's a pain to doing that, but the pain from us developer to keep that up to date is worth the performance improvement at the end. We actually sync it. So if I was to go and change that name, to answer your question, might as well go and do it. Mode. I'll just go and make this Simon. No, that'll confuse the heck out of me. My daughter likes to refer to herself as Claire Bear, so I'll change her first name to be Claire Bear. So when we did that, we detected that that was changed. So if our logic is working right, if I go into attendance, it's already refreshed the cache. So we just basically have a service, a trigger on the server which goes and updates all the caches in the background. We also do a full sync every day, just in case it missed it for some odd reason. The other thing I want to, sorry,
Ken, when you say cache, what are you saying? You're saying a stored data.
Yep, a stored data field in that record.
He's I think he's making it non-relational, that record, pulling in from a bunch of spots.
Yep, correct. So we have obviously the primary source, which is the student detail record itself. But then in the option record, we've literally called the field student name cached. And it's a stored text field, non-relational, so that we can display that and sort on that field. Cheers, David. Now, one thing I found by accident, and it was pure accident, is if you display a card window and that card window belongs to another file, and it has to belong to another file, it can't be a different window, it has to belong to a different file, then you can actually interact with both the card window and the background window. And what I mean by that is if you're in a file and you show a card window, all focus goes to that card window, right? And if you try looping over records, it's in that card window. Effectively, the window behind has become a static read-only thing while that card window shows. But if that card window is in a different file, then scripting-wise, to interact with the card window, you do call the scripts in that file. To interact with the back window, you go back and call scripts in the file B, in the original file. So what we do that is our progress bar that we want to show periodically is a card window. When we're doing that, we're showing that card window in file B. We can then go back to file A, run scripts and loop over the records in our found set or whatever, and be interacting with the original file. Now, does that make sense? I was confused when
it sounds like most of your data is in other files and you just choose to run scripts in other files. And then sometimes you use the main files and layout to navigate.
I guess what I'm saying is here's an example, and I've got a tool here where I want to go enter all. Now, what you saw briefly was a progress bar appear, because we don't know how long it's going to take. There could be 30 kids in the list. What we were doing, I'll try and do it again. No, I need to step through it to make it slower. Is enter all. Silly twit. Referring to myself, by the way. I'm just trying to find, this is probably not a good example, but this is an example where we show a card window. We're showing this progress bar. Oh, where'd that go? The problem is because when you step through it as a debugger, we're actually coming to this window here to show the card window. And now because I've stepped through the debugger, it's totally separate. What that progress bar script is in a totally different file. I've actually ended up in this example now with that progress bar sitting there because I'm stepping through in the debugger, right? Now, because the rest of my script is still in the original file, as I loop over it, I'm able to interact with the records in the original window. And I just want to tell this to loop in a fashion like that. So you can see I'm now stepping over the records in the original file. And I'm able to do that because the progress bar itself belonged to a totally different file. I don't know whether that made sense to anyone or not.
Like you're saying you have a card window, but you can still interact with the underlying layout.
Yep.
That's in WebDirect or in FileMaker.
Both.
Really?
That works in both. Yes.
Huh. And that would be
Thank you.
necessary.
Well, that means you can loop over the found records in your original layout, but have a card window showing a totally different layout.
But you have to
But
have
I
a
think
separate file in order to do this.
the card window layout and scripting has to exist in the separate file. That's the key trick. That's the key to this particular trick is the card window that you're showing belongs to a totally different file. But as soon as you do that, you can then interact with both the contents of the card window and the contents of the original layout at the same time without having to close the card.
Scripts in their respective.
By calling layouts and scripts in that other file. Yes.
Yep.
That explains a few things.
Yeah. Like I said, I discovered it by accident and then thought, actually, this solves our problem because we wanted to, before that, we were showing popovers, but when you had a popover as a progress bar, you couldn't go to the next record because the popover then closed. Or, you went to the card window, but then you ended up looping over the records in the card window. But as soon as you do it in a totally different file, you have that ability to then go back and interact with the original file and its layout. So you didn't have to do a find, change context, or anything like that.
Yeah, Kent, you've told the right people that you're depending on that, right? Because that's an easy lose at some point.
I actually, when I discovered that, Keith, I went back and checked quite a few versions of FileMaker that I still had, and it's worked that way from the start.
Understood.
It's just we didn't discover it. And you're right. If FileMaker decides that that's not how it's supposed to work and goes and fixes it on me, I will scream and yell and complain.
Yep, you'll wait, is what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Keith. I'll say, but this is design and it's worked this way from the start. Okay. I'm mentioning that because it's really useful. I end up going backwards there. So one example of where we use that is we've got a generic progress bar, and it allows us to update the progress bar because it's in that totally different file, regardless of what we continue to do in the original file. Okay. Next thing, we use server schedules that are always running. And if we look on our server at the moment, we currently have about 8 of these. server schedules, they run all day, and they're basically a script which is in a constant loop with a pause. And all the script does is it looks for a new record existing into a queue table, and then it does whatever the queue table tells us to do. Now, when I changed that student's name before, instead of the client going through all the related places that we needed to go and update the case records, what actually happened in the background was we inserted a record into that queue table, which said, we've just edited the student with this identifier, we've changed their name. And then what will happen is the server script in the background goes through and changes all the case records. We could have done that using perform script on server, but there's a pluses and minuses. Whenever you do a perform script on server, you're actually starting a whole new session, which means the server has to open all the files, re-authenticate to all the files and things like that. And that was quite a lot of work when all we were wanting to do was go and change 3 or 4 records in a few tables. So I spent quite a lot of time with testing with this, and we worked out that it was actually better to leave a server-side script. It's paused 99% of the time. It periodically wakes itself every few seconds to check if there's a new record in the queue. And the actual overhead of that versus the overhead of starting a perform script on server and all the overhead of opening the files and authenticating and all that sort of thing, and then versus running a script was that we decided this was the better. Now we use it throughout KAMAR for a number of things.
For other activities?
Yes, we do it for a number of activities. So we use it for our logging. So again, when a record is changed, all we do is insert into the queue that the record that was changed, and then one of those schedules basically picks up that change and goes and actually does all the logging that we want to do. So the work on the client is adding a new record to the table. That's all the individual clients have to do. The server then does all the hard work that flows on from that.
So generic task handler, good stuff.
The other advantage is because it's a queue, if you have someone that's done a find and replace, for example, that then triggered a whole lot of logging to happen, and then you had another user doing the same thing, you're not going to end up with half a dozen perform script and servers from the half dozen users all being fired up. It's basically just going to be one queue, and it will just do it first in, first out. So when there's a lot of activity happening, you don't end up overloading the server with multiple POS scripts. You only ever end up with the one server schedule. Now, when I look at Task Manager for these, even though we've got about 8 of these running, the CPU on the server is still idling at 0% most of the time because these scripts are paused. So when they're paused, they're basically, it's the equivalent of putting a thread to sleep from the computer's perspective. It gets woken up every so often. So we do this for the logging. We do this for recalculating assessments. We do this when something's changed that we need to refresh the cache. We also have some third-party integrations where we're sending data to the third parties. So, when I changed Claire's name, the client inserted one record into the queue. That then server-side updated the logging, updated any caches, notified any third parties that wanted to be known when the student's name was changed. So, for example, Claire got moved into an option subject. We would have eventually, after a few seconds, sent off a notification to Active Directory, which would have then updated Claire's name on Active Directory and changed the grouping, the OUs that she belonged into to reflect that she's now in a new class. Questions on that?
Kent, I have a question. So this kind of robot, let's say, or schedule, because you're putting stuff into the queue, and it's not the user sending a PSOS session to run it, because that session is basically you log in using that. So when a robot acts on that behalf, how does it reconcile that the edits or the creation of the record is related to the user who created the record, if you know what I mean?
Because that's part of the
Oh.
data that we would have inserted into the queue.
Oh, I see.
So
Okay.
the record would have said, this record's been changed by this user to this value. And then when it picks it up, that our logging process says, oh, it was done by this user.
Okay, got it. So then
The biggest-
you lose the benefit of saying get a what is it? A
Get
account
username,
name or something?
get
Yeah,
account
yeah.
name. Yeah.
Mhm.
We don't rely on that at all.
Okay.
Well, that would have been done when the record was added into the queue. The benefit here is the client, and this is Pro and WebDirect, all that they've done is insert a new record into a table. And all the hard work, that's a lot less effort than initiating a POSOS in terms of client work as well.
Right.
And then all the actual hard work is done on the server.
Right. I mean, I thought about doing stuff like this, but even kind of initiating a PSOS session for a user, but then letting it fall dormant and do stuff continually for that user rather than have a scheduled event, like almost like an agent for each user.
But then
you have
you'll end up
somebody-
with, if you've got 50 users, you'll end up with 50 PSOS sessions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
See, we have 8 sessions running, one which does caches, one which does logging, one which does assessment, one which does third-party notifications, so, etc. So you get the hint, one for each key task.
Yeah.
And that's what that one does.
So you have 8 of these kinds of schedules running at all times?
Yep.
And it's much more efficient it's much more efficient to
I'll just quickly log on. This is
it could be
now,
programmed to be more generic.
It
So
is more generic
if
from
you
that
get-
perspective, yeah.
No, I mean, if there's 20 tasks and you only want 8 schedulers or 8 task handlers.
Well, what we've broken them
Just-
down, as
yeah.
you can see here. We've got a logging one. And the reason that one's its own one is because, data's changing all the time. So that one just works away in the background.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter if someone's changed 1,000 records and it takes half an hour to process those 1,000 changes. It'll just eventually get there. Whereas some of the other ones like the timetable one, well, when someone makes a timetable change, we want that to flow through to all users as quick as possible, ideally instantly. So that one we made dedicated because even though only one person in the school is making the timetable changes, when they did it, we needed the flow-on effect to be instant.
Mhm.
So they've got different purposes. The interesting one here is notifications. Now we have the ability for a user to send out a bulk email, right? So to every student and or every caregiver of those students in the school. So they could end up generating 3,000 emails. Now, what we ended up doing was in the past, their client got hogged up for the 2 or 3 hours it took to generate and send those 3,000 emails out because it's not exactly a fast process. What we do now is we basically generate the email and stick it into the queue and then the email. And that process takes a fraction of the time on the client. And then that queue picks up each of those and sends it out as an email in the background. So again, the whole sending of the email, once they've generated the email for sending, half an hour, then when the email sending, which could take 3 hours, all happens on the server in the background. Now we could have started a POS up for that one, but again, if a second user sent an email, we wanted that to hop into the queue as well.
So how do you, if you were to do migrations and you're like upgrading a version or something like that, how does it collide with all the schedules? How do you find a downtime to do the migration?
Okay, so the schedules are all configured to run from 4 o'clock in the morning through till 11 o'clock at night, and they'll exit automatically after 11 o'clock. So there's a downtime between 11 and 4 for any things like that. So, and I'm coming to how we update our solution from that as well. But these schedules, they're all, if I stop them, they're all set to restart automatically every 10 minutes. FileMaker Serve doesn't start it again every 10 minutes. It says it's already running it, so it doesn't start it again. But that means if they get stopped for whatever reason, they just automatically pick themselves up again within 10 minutes. And we use the admin API to create these schedules. So all our clients do, I've been logged out of there, go back into here. Too many windows open. In our setup screen, set up a server, check settings. If I was to, when I run the script here, we basically check to see if those schedules exist. And if they don't, we'll recreate them. Because again, we've got 400 clients spread throughout the country. So we're using the admin API to configure those schedules, specify when they run, and obviously provide the authentication details.
Is this
So
multi-tenant?
No.
Okay.
Each school has their own server.
Got it. Perfect.
Yep. So we've got 400 schools that we need to get these schedules all right on. So
what about if a student transfers from one school to the other, do you have any mechanism to like take all their data over to the other school, or is that not scoped?
That there is a provision. The government has set something up. They're in the process of, let's calling it version 2 of that. So there is some aspect of that, but there's also a privacy aspect of what can and can't be shared. And New Zealand's, to give you an example, like I know in the States, for example, you have a national security, you have one number, right? And that's your identity. New Zealand, I have an IRD, an income number, I have a health number, I have an education number, I have, multiple numbers. I know some of them off the top of my head. I don't know most of them. But New Zealand's privacy doesn't allow sharing of data. So IRD is not allowed to share data with police, and education is not allowed to share it, and health and vice versa. So we have quite tight privacy rules around what can and can't be shared, and that gets in the way of some of what you're talking about.
Back with those server queues, do you have a way of telling if they're busy or not, if they're actually working on anything, or?
Each queue has its own record. And so in the interface, I can see what this queue is doing. So these are the queues that are running. And I can see most of them are idle at the moment. But I can also see how many they've processed today, the last time they processed something as well.
Or if they're processing something right now.
It would say busy and potentially what it was doing. So
okay,
if I go here.
Because if there was nothing to do, it would run for a split second and close again, right? Or pause again.
So now I've just told this one to run, and you can now see it's updating the student filter cache.
Yeah.
And then when it's finished, it goes back to idle. So each queue has its own record, and this is just the portal showing all the records.
Nice.
Do you record the total time it takes for that schedule to complete?
What we have, if I go to the server, each of those queues has its own log. I've just started maintenance, and basically we write to the logs what they're doing. So I can see idle, and then what it's done. Oops, that's an old one. But so we've got a lot of logging which we do on the server to keep track of what's happening for debugging purposes, and how long that takes depends on the school size.
So you got a lot of 401 errors in your system, right?
We go to horrible extents. So the one that really bugs me is the loop go to record request next, exit after last, which produces the 101. So we always use exit script if right prior, so that we're exiting the loop ourselves if we're on the last record already. To get around the 401, you do horrible things like setting a global and then using a go to related searching to see if the related record exists instead of using the 401.
Right.
But one of the great things now, and I say great because it's something that I personally begged for, is that you can now have those being written to their own log file, which is called the script event log file. So those now go to their own log file instead of the normal event log file.
Have you ever tried doing SQL queries to see if that would be more overhead or less for the errors?
I have a personal objection to SQL, so no.
What is the
I don't
debug
like.
Sorry.
We're sorry. If we do that, we turn on extra logging gets written to the log. So in the script we have write logs script steps, and we also have write debug log. So if I turn that on, the log will get a lot more crap in. But it's for us to basically debug why something didn't work. Because you know what server-side scripts are like. That icon only shows if we're logged on as one of us too. So the end users don't see that. Right, I'm well over time, so I've got one more thing I wanted to show. I always wonder if you think when you're doing one of these, am I going to fill up the 90 minutes I've been given? Because KAMAR is a vertical solution, we don't do customization. But what we do is we provide template files, which we call custom files, and we give our clients full access to these, and then we have hooks into these custom files, and that allows schools to create their own tables, to do their own printouts and things like that, their own reports. Once they've made a copy of those template files, we never touch them. We provide new templates, but we never touch their copies. So that's how we can update our solution and still provide our end users with the ability to customize and do their own things, including storing their own data and their own tables. In KAMAR, for those, we just have some endpoints that we call in those custom files, which is how we get the name to display, what items they want to show at action. So that allows the customization of our solution while still maintaining our core data files.
Have you ever distributed any like add-ons that you wanted to be able to distribute?
No.
Hey, Kent, how do you integrate their customizations into the solution? Like, say they want to replace a report because they want to add some extra fields or whatever.
Yep. So I'll go to reporting custom. So basically, if they want a printout that they've designed for staff to use, that's where the declare comes into place. Because basically, with the custom file, if I go into our template and edit it, so all these printouts have a declare. So in the declare, they just give us a return separated list of the names. So I've got my example list there.
Mm-hmm.
These names here are all what they customize. When they choose the printout, they can even tell us if they want a student search or a staff search to show. So that's through a declare. Damn it. Then for an end user, when they come in and choose that custom file and particular printout that they want, and then specify what students they want, we call the action, and we then tell the action, we say, look, the user selected this script, and these are the students they want, and then they do with it what they want. Does that answer your question, Keith?
Yeah, I think so. So you have integrated reporting, and they could decide to do their own reporting instead of your reporting.
Yep, 100%.
And you're giving them a basic free interface that allows them to get to their reporting.
A customizable interface that allows them to get to there. Yep. So they specify these names. So one of my staff has been playing around with this. He's created 4 printouts, given them different names, and says they want the student search. And then when we run that, we literally call their custom file. And then what they do with it, whether they print it, whether they export it, we actually even allow them to customize these buttons. So when they do declare, they can tell us they want their button to say export instead of print.
Do you do a similar thing for like any kind of email templates or anything like that, or any kind of like?
Well, for the email templates, what we've done, set up. Where do we do those now? So, hang on, I just need to remember because this is not my area of expertise. I think it's setup server, school Kiwi, templates. We give them templates, and we've given them an HTML editor where they can then design the template. And these are just merge fields that we then insert the data that they've asked to get inserted into the.
But they can't randomly customize new fields that don't exist or they don't know about, right?
Correct. But if I go to our letters module and I'm on the compose screen, I can literally go here and this is just about every single field. I've got
That's cool.
Absence data, address data, age data, known as we've added a filter, so I could go NCEA because that's a thing, and I can bring out this is NCEA is New Zealand's qualification, so I can bring that and add that into my merge field. This is in the interface. If they go into their custom file, then they can get any raw data field they want. So we've attempted to give them access to any data field about a student. This is a more controlled way, obviously.
Yeah, in the merge, do you give them access to their custom database fields?
Yes. Yep. Oh, no, because we can't see those files from that direction. We don't tap into those. So if they create their own table with data fields in their custom files, we don't see that in our interface. They would have to create the layout and print out in their custom file with that data. If I've understood your question correct.
Yeah. Basically, they don't have access to your merge feature. They'd have to create their own merge in the external file.
Or they would have to generate a JSON object that passes to you that you could take as data that could use as logic.
What we've done is we actually have just some generic custom fields, 1 through to 12. If there's something that they wanted for that, we would say, look, right into that field, and then you can include that field.
But it's only the fields in that specific table, not related fields necessarily.
Yeah, but then if they wanted that, they would collect the related fields and then write it into that generic custom field. So there's ways around they do it.
Yeah, you could change those 12 fields to use that calculation that allows them to point to any field.
Yeah, potentially, but
you use get field or something.
We could. I'm going to say we're not going to, but we could. You're right, we could. But I think if they're going to that level, we would be saying, look, actually, you're creating the printout in your custom file or the email, because we actually we give them access to send emails from their custom file. They generate the email, and then we've given them a script they can call and say, look, send this email to this person, and we'll do all the sending of the email. So, right.
How much web viewers are you displaying for the app and for WebDirect, or any?
At most on a layout 1, but most of the time we don't use web viewers.
Okay.
If we want to display something HTML wise, so we've got some graphing tools which use a web viewer. When we display the emails, because they come in as HTML, we would use a web viewer. But most of the time, but we would limit ourselves to 1 web viewer on a layout at the most. And
what plugins are you utilizing?
So I have 2 plugins of my own. 3 actually. I lie. 3.
Is he referring to web viewer plugins or plugins?
Are you talking about FileMaker plugins, or are you talking about web viewer? Yeah. I don't know. I wasn't sure who asked that question, Keith. Was that Tony?
No, that was no, not me. I think that was Keith asking a question.
No. Okay. The last thing I want to go over is how we manage our automations of our updating. And basically, we have this at a point for a number of years now. I've fully automated our updates since 2010. We're basically, our process is, as a developer, we make a change and we increase that particular file or file's build number. We have a automated routine which prepares the upgrade. Now, this can be triggered ad hoc or it happens automatically overnight. We're now using the FM developer tool to remove admin access and save our files as a clone. And then it's zipped and uploaded to our updates web server. So that all happens on our end. And then for each of the schools, which remember we've got 400 of these spread around the country, they have a update script which runs every morning between 1 and 2, which basically checks to see if there's an update to be done. It then goes through the process of downloading and unzipping it, closing the file using an API, data migration tool to update the file, and then once all successful, move the new file in place and open the updated file. Now, as I said, we've been doing this for longer than both the data migration tool and the brand new tool existed. But to show you how this works, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in. I've got my development copy here, and every single file in our solution, all 46 of them, have this script called file build number. And I'm just going to increase the build number by 1 and save that script. So that's the first bit. So imagine the developers changed the layout, fixed a bug, added a new field, whatever. If they've done multiple files, we have to remember to increase that build number in each of the files. That's the easy bit. The next bit, and I just need to copy, oops. I have a copy of FileMaker floating around. This is my database, which basically prepares the updates. Now, this starts a script on the server. And what it does, the first thing it does when I click it is it goes through each of our files and identifies, I've reinitiated that. It's identified that this file is newer build than the one with there. So now what it's done on the server is it's created a backup. Once it's created the backup, it's then using the new developer tool to remove admin access and save as a clone. And then the final step is it will upload that file to our central update server. Fingers crossed.
You guys remove your admin access on your solutions?
We do. It's out in the wild. There's a reason we do that, which I won't mention on a public forum, but we do.
Gotcha.
So because we don't have ownership of those files, in the sense we don't, they're sitting on servers throughout the country and those servers are not under our control. We basically remove admin access and that removes the display version of calculations as well, part of that process. And we do that before we share them out, 100%.
So I have a question about the customization. So
yep.
When the client wants to customize that, they hook into being able to link to the current files. Is it
Correct.
that you're turning off the ability to only have full access to link to it? To the file?
So we don't, sorry.
Like, how you can have that setting in security that says only allow full access to access this file?
Okay, so what we've done is we use all our files do have the restrict enabled. Okay. So all our custom files, they have access to the data files, not to the interface files, but to the data files. So we've granted those custom files the ability to access each of the data files things. So that's all it's needed. They don't need to, they can't go and add another file on their own because they need full access to do that. So they can't do that. So, but we've granted them the one access to the files that they need.
So the custom file is something that you ship for them, and then that's where they can do their customization. Did I get that right?
Yeah, correct. So if I go set up custom files, we provide them with a template file, and we will update that temp file with new templates, new examples, or anything that they need to be aware of, right? So we call that custom file lists. They can then copy that file in as list 1, 2, 3, whatever, and they work with the copy of that template. Does that answer your question?
How do you deal with the authentication, right? Because that list file is authenticated to connect to your data file, and it's only allowing it, right? So if you do another duplicate of it, does that just carry over?
Yes, it does.
Oh wow. Okay, cool. I didn't know that. Thanks.
It can bite you, but it does. It's fine until you start changing it. So, but yes, if you make a copy, that copy is authorized to all the same files, because the authorization is a two-way token, let's call it, it's probably not the right word, but it's a two-way between the parent and the things, but it doesn't compare the file name. It just says, do I have the right token to access the file? And the other file do I have this token matching? So when you do the authorization, you're creating a unique token between those two files. But when you copy the file, that unique token doesn't change.
I see. Okay. Thank you. I did not know that.
I'll make a certification question about that.
Was there, David?
Yeah.
I think there was. Because one of the things is when you make a copy in your solution, the first thing you're supposed to do is go through and reset that unique token for the copy of the file. But if you don't reset that token, you can take advantage of it, which is what we're doing.
Yeah, there's a general misunderstanding about how that carries through in files, and that was why it ended up in the certification.
Yeah. Where it gets fun is if you don't reset it and then you start adding new ones, that's when you can get into a mess. Yeah. But in this case, we're copying it and we're not ever touching it. They're all the same. We're sweet. Okay, right. So anyway, back to my update process. So my update process has now uploaded a new version of that particular file. So if I go to another server, and I'm on my test server here, and we update our daily run that particular script, it's going to run a script. And the easiest way to show this to you is by actually looking at the logs, because nothing exciting happens. But basically, you'll see our update routine goes through every single file, works its way through it, and it's now on the main UI, and it's going to tell me in a second. Oh, sorry, oh, hang on, I missed a step. Apologies. Click upload.
Well, you got the positive and negative test keys right there. Nothing happened the first time.
Nothing happened the first time. Thanks, Keith. I was going to do that second, but we'll do that the first. So at the end of this is what happens every day. Yeah, good point. We go through every single file and we compare the build number, does it match with what we expect it to be? And at the end of all that process, we come through and
migration tool.
Guess what's happened here, Keith?
Failed.
No. It's we actually, one of our integrations is with Athenaeum, which is a library product written by another FileMaker developer in Auckland. And between 2 o'clock this afternoon and now, he's released an update. And my process has detected that there's an update to his product and has now just updated his product. So it's succeeded, Keith. It just didn't update my product. we have this routine running every night at a random time for each school between 1 and 2 o'clock. Random so that we don't end up with 400 schools all trying to hit our update server exactly the same minute, which basically goes through, compares the build numbers, and as appropriate will basically update that school's particular file.
And you have protections for rollback in case something went sideways?
Yep. Well, there's a backup that gets run prior.
Okay.
So there's normally a daily backup run prior. But then, of course, you've got the issue is identifying what goes wrong. I have added over the years so many checks. At the end of the process, when the last thing the script does, it updates that log to our central server. And then we have an automated routine which runs at like 6:30 every morning, which basically checks every single one of those log files to tell if there's any errors or not. It even then tells us if a particular school didn't phone home because their server's offline or things like that. So that's how we keep track of those.
What about post-migration? Because, as developers, we have schema and data changes that are part of schema. Do you have a script that runs that reseeds data?
So we actually have a per file script. We refer to it as a perform after update script. So after that particular file is updated, it automatically triggers the perform after update in that file to run. Sometimes those files do nothing. Other times those files may do logic changes, like you're saying. And then we also have a final perform after update script, which runs after everything's been checked. And that's because obviously sometimes data changes need 2 or 3 files to be updated before you can do the change.
And do all your value lists and things reside in a data table versus the main UI table, or where do they live?
So we use value lists for our purposes, but we don't allow schools to customize those value lists. Or if they are customized value lists, they're based on data tables, not obviously things like that. So when we do an update, I use the flag to replace the value list with what's in our development copy.
Gotcha.
Do you have a way to do a health check against all your schools?
Yep. Well, the update routine has some parameters we can put in as well. So if we want to do a rebuild, we can actually initiate a rebuild. And that means one of 2 things. We'll replace that file even though the build number is the same. And we'll also set the parameters of the data migration tool to reevaluate calculations and rebuild indexes. So that's a way if we ever want to, if we suspect some corruption in the database, we can initiate those sorts of things. Because at the end of the day, the phone home sends the log file to us, which is the second part of your question, Keith. And we have a script on our end which processes every single one of those log files and alerts us to any errors or warnings that may have been reported in the log files, including, a particular file's gone walkies, which, some technician goes and does things like restore from backup, but doesn't restore every file, things like that.
On the largest school, which I imagine has the best machinery, how long does the entire
solution
take to up?
One of our schools is up to about 6 hours. Since the data migration tool, it's reduced. I think that particular school, there was 6 hours for one file because it was just the amount of data in that file. But since using the data migration tool, that's significantly reduced that time down.
How many years does each school keep of records? Do they have a archive schema?
We have to keep data for a minimum of 7 years after a student leaves school.
Wow.
And financial data for 10 years. So we do have an archive process, but so we've got, potentially if a student's done the whole 1 to 13 at that one school, which we have some like that, plus another 7 years after they left, so 20 years, we're keeping some student data. I don't know what the retention rates are required, but every now and then we do get requests for a student that left 5 years ago and they want a copy of a report or whatever
What
reason.
happens if the school wants to keep it a different period of time?
Then they have to make a backup and keep that backup somewhere. No, we've never had a school come to us and say they want to keep it longer than the 10 years after a student left. I like what we do after that is we do have an alumni module, which is a transcript of that student record, and we keep that forever. So we've got one school which has got 100 years worth of students in their database.
Someone went through the paper and actually added it to your database?
I don't know. When they came on board, they gave us a spreadsheet that they had, which had 100 years worth of students in it. So that we brought that into that. So I don't know how they were maintaining it prior to us, but so that alumni area, we don't have to keep the same detail of financial and pastoral and that sort of details. We just write a text transcript of their record of learning.
Sure. So how many friends and family ask you to bump their kids' scores?
No. No, I wouldn't have to do that.
Wait, you can't even log in afterwards, right?
We have a debug account which we can log in as for any site, but that's not a full access account because obviously we removed full admin. We've basically had to create a special account which has got enough access for us to modify layouts, debug scripts, but obviously we can't. Once you've removed admin access, you can't go into managed database, you can't change custom functions or anything like that. You can't even use the data viewer.
Yeah. Oh. Painful.
So
Yeah, that's a challenge to figure out problems.
yeah, you kind of get ways around it. You create a button bar with the equivalent of what you would have done in the data viewer anyway, and just tuck that on the layout. That's one tool that we use a lot. In the very worst case scenario, we're basically data migration tool the data from the non-full admin access copy back into a full admin access
Oh,
copy.
wait, you're
that's
using
cool.
evaluate with a button bar to figure out.
You just create a button bar, and then in the calculation, you do exactly what you would do in the data viewer.
Yeah, using evaluate.
Or I can now use the calculation layouts.
You can use the calculation layouts, yeah. We haven't touched those yet, and we're in the mindset as to whether we will or not. But we don't feel there's the only advantage they offer, and this is again, I'll clarify this is a personal opinion. The advantage they offer is that you can do a date or a number, and then you can format it using the things. That's the sole advantage that I see in that. Otherwise, you just use a button bar, because with the button bar, you can position the object exactly the same size where you want it, and it never resizes when you go to edit the calculation, which is probably my grumble against the layout calc. Like I said, personal opinion.
The layout calc should retain its size as long as you only ever use the conditional menu and
Correct.
never change the font size or other elements. Yeah, it's finicky, very finicky.
Yeah, exactly. I hate that my personal objection to it is if you've done your layout calc and you've resized it to exactly the space you want, which is all very good, and then one day without thinking you double click it because you want to do something, and then you're having to reset. That's what you don't have that issue with button bars. Button bars, of course, if you want to format a number, you have to do that manually the hard way.
The other issue is that the layout calculation isn't easily understandable with FM perception because of the way it's storing the calculation as text, not as an evaluated with the C data and all the other functions that you're using in that calculation. So
Yeah, but there's plans on changing that.
we
There are
hope.
plans on changing that, yeah.
Yeah.
Fingers
So we
crossed.
we personally don't use FM Perception. We have our own, again, in-house, I guess, version tracking. So I just have an SVN repository, which basically we dump out the XML, again, automated task every night. And this basically creates, I mean, we're dealing with that. I'll just open this up in my close 123 millions. But if I wanted to find out where a particular item is used, so for example, when I wanted to count how many times the top nav was being used, I just searched our entire SVN repo for whenever, or the name of that object, and top nav menus, I think it was, and then that tells us every single occurrence of that in our solution. So we use that as our tool for identifying where a field is used, and this does work with the new layout calcs, because we are just literally looking at, oh, that's a piece of text. So that's how we keep track of.
How many devs do you have working on your systems?
4.
Nice. Okay.
And we're all working on the one solution. So it's
on the dev version or a variant of dev versions. How do you manage like feature sets? You do this feature set, you do this feature set, and then at some point they fold together.
Yeah. We have a development server, a beta server, and a public's gold server. So we'll work on the development server for any major features and bug fixes and things like that. And then at a point, we'll set a deadline of, right, today we're going to basically copy that down to the beta branch. And then after that point, if beta testing discovers any bugs or issues, we'll make the fix in both copies, basically. So we're branching the code at that point onwards. And then we have the public version, which is there. So there's nothing worse than being halfway through a major change and then having to do a critical fix. So in that case, we'll do that critical fix on the public copy and get it out and things like that. But in terms of development, there's, when we set our targets or our feature changes, one developer will get assigned a particular job and they'll work on it. Or if there's 2 of us that need to do a particular job, you work between yourselves to figure out who's going to do what aspects of that job.
Do you manage feature flags or something like that so that you have the legacy version and then a new version? How do you manage that kind of structure?
Well, one of the advantages, we try not to. If you have an area of functionality that you are deprecating with something new, then you tend to, we'll clearly move it into and flag it to our clients as deprecated, and then it will sit there for as long as it sits there for a year or 2 before it kind of disappears.
Gotcha.
And then eventually you get around to removing it out.
And are your clients using OAuth, or have they? No. Okay. All FileMaker auth, external auth.
Yeah.
Any iOS?
That again, we only use the iOS for a reception app, and that's a fixed user anyway. That one is not tied to a particular staff member. Because that's used for reception. So a visitor or anyone that's unknown comes into a school, signs in. So that's a different use case. We don't have to worry about that one.
It's WebDirect, not actually FM Go.
Oh, sorry. No, we're using FM Go for the reception app.
Okay.
We use WebDirect for the staff. So we've, from that perspective, we have a very dedicated use for FM Go. For a feature of our product is using FM Go. But for teachers, it's WebDirect.
Very cool.
Right. Any other questions? I've done my dash.
Oh. Does New Zealand deserve you? That's the question. This is really
I don't.
I mean, it's the scope of it. I mean, there's so many schools and everything.
Yeah.
I remember when I lived in Toronto for a few years. I worked for the Ministry of Education in Ontario, where they licensed FileMaker for the entire province of Ontario, and I was QA to work on the localization of English and French because this was way back when, and they always had to support both languages. Anyway, I was just curious because there's the ministry had a specific way to mandate the report card output and all these kinds of things. So I guess all the schools have this standard format, right? They all have to follow. So
No, yes and no.
okay.
In our case. So
Yeah.
we have standard reporting to both the Ministry of Education in terms of head count and roles and things like that, our
Yep.
attendance. We have standardized reporting to the Qualifications Authority in terms of student assessment results. But in terms of how schools choose to report to students, parents, caregivers, that's 100% under their control. So anything in that nature is fully customizable by the individual school.
Okay. Very cool.
I think New Zealand have done a really forward-thinking thing here in allowing each of the schools to control their own data, but I mean, obviously the schools are beholden to the ministry to submit that data in a certain format, but each of the schools controls their own data. And in Australia, we have the different states and very small territories like the Northern Territory decided in their wisdom that the only way that the territory schools could work is for every school to have effectively, a central database in Darwin and just terminals in the schools to actually do all their data. And they just completely ruined their school administration systems. Whereas New Zealand is a much, much bigger beast than the Northern Territory is, with 100,000 people, 200,000 people, and they've decided that each of the schools should be in charge of their own data. And I think it's a very forward-thinking thing that happens very rarely.
And because of the privacy is that the schools the Ministry of Education don't necessarily have access to that data. They have to ask the schools for it. I mean, there's certain things that they have to supply to the Ministry of Education, such as who's attending their school so they can get reporting for heads counts. But other data like assessment data that's non-qualification level and all that, 100% down to the school.
Yeah. Elsewhere, you look at Queensland education and they would actually I think they'd absolutely have a fit if they didn't own all of the data.
Are most of your servers on-prem, or are you hosting them yourselves?
At this time, we host about just over a quarter ourselves. Then we were aware of an IT company that's hosting probably half that many again, and then I'd say 200 odd are hosted on there themselves.
And are you SBA, or what program are you selling the solution as?
We were we were the first vendor in the FileMaker world that I'm aware of that had a license for us, and so basically our license is 22,500 KAMAR licenses. So the copy of FileMaker supplied to school is a license to us, and we've obviously we have to report to FileMaker every year our license count base for each student. But prior to that, we had to go through the rigmarole of every single school having their own license, and that was a nightmare. So,
is it by student or by platform or by administrators? What is
ours is by FTTE teacher.
Okay.
So basically, the government funds the school for 65 teachers, then our license is for 65 teachers, plus the admin staff.
Gotcha.
And KAMAR just writes this this big novelty check every year and hands it over to Claris.
It's not like that at all, Dave. It normally involves a visit to the bank because of the millions of dollars that I send to FileMaker of licensing. And the banks always cringe at me and say, you can't send this much money. And I said, well, here, I did it last year, do it again.
Well, I've sat through many of FBA or closing sessions and all the keynotes and all. Who is KAMAR? And now I've finally seen what you guys do. All the awards,
well, we keep getting those awards.
Yes.
We had to move them higher because the sun was hitting them and they started fading.
Or they might burn a hole in the wall because they're glass.
There was a point where we actually, one day, my wife pointed out that the sun was reflecting and there was this little scorch mark happening on the wall. So that was another reason to move them. You're quite right. Nowadays, they're colourful. And if we skip the one that looks like an item that shouldn't be mentioned, and the newer ones, so they're a little bit more colourful.
Wow.
Hello, Vince. I've now recognized your voice.
Yeah. Well, I've got a radio voice now. My voice has been drying out, so I'm enjoying it while it lasts. So yeah, very cool.
I was gonna ask you if you feel okay.
Yeah, no, I feel fine.
I couldn't tell the difference between Vince and Keith's voice for a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm trying to impersonate Tom Waits.
And then I was looking for Jonathan Stark on the call.
Well, I think we've really used up a lot of your time. Yeah, you've earned your time. I think the number of questions have been really interesting because
a strong indicator of the interest. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating how you've evolved this whole I hate to say the word monopoly, but it's kind of amazing. Yeah, no, I know, but I'm just joking about it. But it's fascinating. It's really incredible. Yeah. So.
Well, hopefully, I mean, my half my presentation was showing how we are using WebDirect and how it can successfully be used to put your solution on the web. And
Right.
hopefully the gotchas I've shown you will save you some time if you go down that path of using WebDirect.
Right, but a lot of the automations too, the whole automation of scheduling the updates and all that stuff. That's totally very cool.
That has been the biggest life sense for us, because prior to that, you release an update and then you've got to get the technicians to download and install it, and it could take 2 months for them to do it. Whereas, we can get this out next day. And if you make a mistake, because you do, something doesn't work as you plan, then
I
get the fix out.
You can fill a whole day of Engage.
Very cool.
The interesting thing about Kent as a developer and as a business owner and as a FileMaker developer has always been that Kent finds his own solutions to problems. Other people just sit there and whinge to FileMaker or to Claris and say, your software doesn't work. It's a load of shit. This isn't working for us. I can't make this work. Kent always finds solutions for the problems. And I think the interesting thing here for people, if you go onto the FileMaker community, you will very easily find 10 or 20 people who will tell you that WebDirect is the worst thing in the world. It doesn't work. It's not good enough, and it should be disbanded. But I think the good thing about this presentation is Kent has made WebDirect do 95% of what FileMaker Pro does, and he's making it work. And it does work. And WebDirect is incredible software the guys who built WebDirect, I was there in the US when there was a group of 20 of us sat in a room at Claris headquarters and saw one of the first demos of WebDirect, and we all just sat back in our chairs and said, "What have you guys done? This is unbelievable." And it is unbelievable software, and this presentation is a testament to what WebDirect can actually do. So don't believe the naysayers who say that WebDirect is rubbish. It is absolutely unique software in the world, and there is nothing else in the world that comes close to what WebDirect can do.
Well said, David. Thank you.
I know, I'm surprised we haven't had a presentation like this on WebDirect. I don't know if ever.
I was just thinking, as David said that, I remember when, and the guy's name who came from FileMaker who came out to my office and demonstrated it to us initially, David, it was probably a similar one to what you saw. And I remember my web developer at the time basically saying, well, that does me out of a job. So he didn't leave, but it was like that was his reaction to WebDirect. Yeah, like I said, I mean, it's the great thing from my perspective is the develop once, design once, and it just works. And once you know what those limitations are, and there's so few of them. I mean, I was struggling to get past 10, so that's not bad really. Then once you know those and have them in your head, then you can make it work. So.
Just as a question, sorry, the initial decision to go WebDirect, you're a brave man, because everything we've been told and all the anecdotes, we wouldn't have done it. No, I won't, mate. You know, hats off to you and your group, because you've just shown us something that all the naysayers have said don't do. And it's almost like there's a whole lot of positives that have come along with this that we haven't had in this community or this platform.
I think we've shown that you can take and I'm not going to deny it, KAMAR is a rather complicated application, and publish it on WebDirect. And I understand what you say, because you know, when we first had the discussions we're going to do this, I had it in my own staff was, no, we're not going to, you know, that's a dumb idea. But once we proved that it was working, and it's there. So.
Yep. Are you having to support multiple browsers across different environments and platforms? Mac, Windows, Chrome, Safari?
Well, the reality is with WebDirect, you get that, right? FileMaker say they support Edge, Chrome, and Safari natively, right? That's what they've said they support with WebDirect. We have users using Firefox, and there's actually a bug with Firefox, but I've raised it with FileMaker and they've fixed it. So, I mean, even though it's not officially supported, there's very few issues with using Firefox. I've got a crazy staff member who uses some Brave browser or something like that. I'm not sure. I mean, generally, it just works. So, I mean, it is HTML5 compatible.
Yep. What are the positives of doing it this way? Like, you're almost in an environment like you're not doing it 10x times in development, are you? To WebDirect now, you got the same set of layouts. You got a few caveats with click through, and you were mentioning about the weight of the layout because of tab controls. I'm assuming that tooltips come into that as well. That they get loaded.
We don't use tooltips. Again, a personal objection to tooltips. I hate with tooltips the fact that you cannot control when they show and how long they show. So if I can I'll just share my screen, because we instead went to take you guys out of it. We instead have these what we call eye popovers, which are popovers. We have them wherever we feel that there is something that is worthwhile explaining. And the advantage of these is they're visual to the user. They don't have to hover the mouse over the field and see, oh, there's a tooltip there or not.
Which is very slow to render.
Which is very slow to render. Two, they've got full control over when it shows, how long it shows for. And because it's a popover, they just click to get rid of it, right?
Yep.
So we don't use tooltips. I personally hate them. So we use these, and these render in WebDirect just as well. That does remind me of one annoyance in WebDirect. It doesn't honor the line heights. So when you have lines like this, you don't have any control over the spacing of line heights. It's basically squashed up for everything. It's one of those annoyances, but one day they might fix it.
Yeah.
So, but it's not a deal breaker annoyance. It's just one of those annoyances.
Have you ever looked into like better forms at all?
No.
Because I know a lot of clients or people that are using better forms are doing stuff for schools specifically, and they're having it's been great for them because they're able to get FileMaker as the backend engine, but push stuff out to the custodians and the people that are student guardians and stuff like that to manage the data. It's pretty cool.
I think
Another
one of the things about Kent and his business, it's
You can stop now, David.
It's obviously a multi-million-dollar business, and one of the things about Kent is that he can't afford to be beholden to a third party. So he can't afford to be beholden to a plugin developer. He can't afford to be beholden to FM Better Forms or anything like that.
That makes 100% sense.
I'll be blunt. We also do that ourselves. You're right, David. I mean, for our emailing and texting solution, KAMAR basically, in one of the server-side schedules, posts that to our central servers here. And then we have our own. I have a bank of 10 email servers, which we use for sending out emails.
That's crazy.
And then I have
any one of them goes down, you can switch to an alternate.
I don't need to. It does that automatically. If one of them gets blacklisted, I just remove it out of the pool until I can sort the blacklisting. But yeah, they're all on a round robin sort of basis. And if one goes down, it just falls out of the round robin. So,
but
and likewise,
you've definitely got a success story for a vertical, mate. At the end of the day,
yeah.
Are those VMs?
Yes, Keith, they're virtual machines.
Yeah, so you could spin up another one in a second.
Oh, I could, yeah, exactly. I just need to give it a public IP address. The thing about emails is you've got to build a reputation, especially with like Google and things like that. So when you first fire up the server, Google gets quite slow on you. But then once it trusts you, it will receive emails more faster. So, I mean, we also have a texting gateway as well, which goes through one of the mobile providers here in New Zealand. So for sending text messages, we do the same thing. I mean, when we went into COVID lockdowns, we saw something like, I think we hit 550,000 emails that we sent in about a 3 to 4 hours period.
Wow.
I didn't sleep that night because I was sitting there watching the logs, just watching to make sure that I think we sent over 300,000 text messages as well. So it was like, yeah.
Holy crap.
Yeah, exactly. My lack of sleep that night was because of like, please don't fall over. Please don't fall over. So
trying to compete with messages.
the reality is people use so many different instant messaging technologies, but good old SMS text messages are still, everyone has a mobile phone that accepts SMS text messages.
Is that running on the same server as the main solution?
No, basically KAMAR uploads, like an individual school says, hey, I want to send this email or this text message to these people. That request comes to our central server and we do it here. Where one of my many virtual machines does that.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
So someone asked earlier about, do we use Claris Connect or anything like that? No, because everything that it offers, we actually have already been doing for a number of years. And
so You're
Right.
actually you're not just a hosting provider and a solution provider, you're also an endpoint for various things that your clients need.
Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful.
We'll find a way to do it.
And
Yeah,
if
and
one of the things about
if one email service provider like MailChimp or Mailgun or whatever goes down, can you easily switch to another to push out mails if their services are down?
we use our own.
Okay.
We don't use them. We're using our, like I said, we've got 10 mail servers for sending out emails. So we are a MailChimp if you want to look at it from that perspective.
Beautiful.
okay. Well, Eric, what do you say?
It's 5 o'clock. It's home time.
Well, yeah. So that was great.
Okay, for me, it's 5 o'clock Friday. It's home time. So,
It's 8 o'clock at here.
Yeah.
So
11 o'clock in Florida.
if you don't mind, I wanted to say something really quick.
Yeah, go for it.
hey, Keith.
Yeah. So as many of you may know, I'm not at FileMaker anymore. So I'm going to just every once in a while check in with you. Hope that things are going well. And it's been a pleasure working with you guys for so long.
We're talking about DIGFM or KAMAR?
Both.
Okay.
I talk to Kent like 2 or 3 times a month already. Even not working at FileMaker. And before that, it was, what, 2 or 3 times a week?
Well,
It was every time I had a complaint or an issue or something I needed you to sort for me.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, Keith's a good listener.
So I already found a job. I'm at Apple as a consultant working on the Apple Store.
Nice.
That's
So the online store testing REST APIs, basically sort of the same thing I was doing at FileMaker. But instead of FileMaker being a backend, there's other technologies serving as a backend.
wow, cool. Well, you're still the record holder at DIGFM, and I don't want you to forget that.
4-hour tour?
What record am I holding?
Longest meeting ever.
Yeah, I've watched that video. It went on for a long time.
Yeah.
I fell asleep and woke up and it was still going.
Oh no!
It's a half a day, half a work day there.
It took me a few days to watch it.
What?
Oh my God.
Which one was that?
A
Your
year
most
ago.
recent one
Like
for
2.5
DIGFM.
hours or something?
That was DIGFM.
Yeah, I know, but which one was that? You know how many DIGFMs I've been to?
Yeah, but I mean, the one you like presented here, let's see if I can find it.
Yeah, I've only presented it at like maybe 40, right?
Well, you would interject in a lot of them, but there was only like 2 that I, at least while I was.
I got it there.
Oh, what was it?
I'll drop a link.
Okay.
It was last year. It was about 4.5
It was
hours.
last year. Okay. It was the one with me and Clay and
No, Clay wasn't there.
no, Chris in the photo up front on the first slide or second slide.
Yep, I think it was that one.
Yeah, 4.5 hours. Yep.
It couldn't have been 4. It was like
It was 4.5 hours.
4.5. You slipped some stuff in there.
No, there was like a little.
It was 4 hours,
26
28 minutes, and 22 seconds.
No, that's the length of the video. We finished long before that. We were just like gabbing at the end.
Oh, we counted
It's
all.
probably longer.
It still counts. It still counts.
Yeah.
Yes.
If there's something, if there's nuggets of information in there that people want, then it counts.
You don't chop it off, Eric?
That one we did.
'Cause I don't-
Like, where do you cut it off at? It's like, hey, wait, he just said something else that I could that might be important. So you just couldn't. There
Well,
was no place to stop it.
yeah, I can't control like questions come in. You have to answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the summary where you're giving a summary at the 3.5 hour mark, and then by the halfway through the 4 hour mark, they're trying to say, this is where we're going to finish. So yeah, there was an hour of discussions afterwards, and sometimes that's where the best little information nuggets are, just in those conversations.
Yeah, at least we had an index for that one. That one has an actual index for it.
Yeah.
I see one for this. You're working on an index right now. I see them.
Yeah. Sometimes I get them in there, sometimes I don't, but yes. Sometimes they're absolutely necessary.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But anyway,
Hey,
going back,
Eric.
it was a pleasure, guys.
So Vince, where are you at right now? Are you stateside or are you?
Well, yeah, I moved back from Germany. We are currently living in Florida these days.
I'm sorry.
Boca Raton.
I'm sorry. You should be back in Germany.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but yeah, it was too far for DIGFM.
Yeah. It's like, what time would that? This would be like 5:15 in the morning or something crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's like all night. Yeah.
We had a bit of a battle as to whether we could leave it here for me or whether Vince was going to get it to shift the time so he wasn't doing a 5 a.m. because he was nodding off. But yeah, where in the world is Vince? Back in Florida.
Yeah.
So
Carmen San Diego.
we were having our latency battles.
Yep.
So
So, all right. Well,
Are we all ready? Are we ready for Dev Engage February?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the question is whether or not I hold a meeting then just to
it's
probably just a generic meeting. And if we do a roundup meeting, it's going to have to be that night. I don't know if we'll have time for another roundup meeting any other time, but people on the plane.
Well, for those of us not getting over there, it would be helpful just to hear what went on outside of the official press releases and people's blog posts and Matt Navarre running around with a recorder. Grabbing Vince
about
and
the Austin trip.
What's that?
Are you talking about Austin or?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, it'd be pretty cool if we could get the roundup going on that evening, like February 8th. Then, I mean, everything's still hot on the press, really.
It's a pretty small location.
Small location, less than 650 people.
Yeah, we just need a spy on the ground to gather.
We should be able to wrap up in 20 minutes.
No, not this group.
So I am.
How do you
I'm
guys feel about that? You want it to be at a better or different place somehow, and you still want to go? Or?
This venue is not conducive to our past experience. So the way now we're being subjugated to sign up now and decide what if you're going to eat at 11:30 or 12:30, that I can't decide that now. My body doesn't know that.
Oh,
So
all those little rules are because it's Apple.
It was because it's a very small venue, very tight spaces, and they have to manage the people.
Well, you're eating out of an Apple cafeteria, so they have to kind of.
No, we're not.
You guys?
We're not in a cafeteria. We're in our conference center, and the food is going to be provided
by Apple
ad hoc in places, but we're not in one general space. They're splitting the lunches into 2 general sessions.
Got it. Sessions for lunches.
Wow.
I hadn't thought about that.
So I'm working on the Visionary Bar app, and I'll give you a little quick preview so I can find it here. So on this here, and it's all generated by Betterforms. So we have I broke something with the sessions, so that broke. Here's all the visionaries here that are past visionaries, and here's a schedule. And so We can see who's gonna be at the bar at that time, and you can go pick somebody. We're gonna have some actions there, and then the all the vendors where they're at, which floor they're on, and stuff like that. We're gonna have some stuff like
Oh,
that.
so
It's, yeah.
they're even going to be in different places.
Oh, yeah, it's three. It's a 4-floor building, and 3 of the floors are where the vendor sessions are spread out over. So you have to figure out where you want to go visit them. They're there from 9 to 5 for the 2 days, 9 to 5, 9 to 4 for the 2 days. And then the visionaries can go.
Is this to replace the Go app?
This is going to replace no, this is replacing the FileMaker Visionary Go version. In order to do anything with the Engage, you have to use the official Salesforce sign in register, because it's all about space. Some of these rooms are very small. Some of the rooms are 10 people, 12 people. So you have to use their app to register. I have no control over that. So I'm just...
Yeah, the conference center is not a great conference center.
It's terrible for what we've ever experienced.
Yeah.
I mean, it's worse than the first year I went was Monterey, which was like 900 people, and it was a conference, you know.
Did you ever go to Palm Springs?
Yes. Yeah.
What do you think about that in comparison?
This is going to be harder because it's very controlled. It's very, very rigid. I mean, we're smaller. We are a smaller venue than we've had for any official conference, because even the very first conference or the second conference had more people.
Thanks, Ken. Goodbye.
Yeah,
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Time. Cheers, bye.
Okay.
Take care, Ken.
The worst for me was San Francisco.
That was the one year I missed.
It was the worst.
It was an awkward.
Is that when we're in the car park for the exhibition?
It was downtown San Francisco, and it was in this hotel on multiple floors and snaking around, and it was just, the layout was really, really bad.
And you thought Vegas was bad about like disbursement. That was like the same.
I don't know. Vegas was all right.
Well, Vegas, a lot of people just left, you know. There's no spontaneous like conversations going on.
Meet in the hallway and just talk.
Yeah.
So you're just going to have to be loud and obnoxious and tell them what your opinion of the facility is.
Exactly.
Okay, and hopefully they'll listen and
They should.
won't be there again.
I think it's just a warm up to get going back to Engage anyway, right? It's probably just a...
Well, Clarice doesn't have to pay to buy a hotel chain, Marriott or anything. They don't have to commit to 2 years.
Right. But there's a rumor that Apple is building some other campus in San Jose that is a lot bigger, right? So maybe my thinking is they try it here, and then they're going to try it in San Jose next year.
As long as we don't have to use their Salesforce registration system, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Every time you go into your system, you have to get a new PIN code. You have to bookmark the email that you got to modify your schedule. Every time.
Yeah, that's probably a Salesforce.
It's all built on Salesforce. Yeah.
Yeah, limitation.
Huh, strange.
Apple does.
Right,
Clarice doesn't eat their own dog food.
No. For those of you going to Engage, have a beer for me.
About that too, okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. All
No
right.
joke.
Yeah. Yeah, so those who are going to Engage, have a beer for me, because you know that I would normally have one with you, each and every one of you. And yeah, hopefully we'll catch up next time. So, no, great session today. Ken did a great job. All right, see you all later.
Bye. Bye, Darren. All right, I'm gonna sign off as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that time.
Guys,
Yeah.
keep
Good
FileMaker
night,
alive.
everyone.
It's a cool application. It deserves more attention.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you, Keith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take
See you guys.
care.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks all.